Africa has been the poorest region of the world for basically 2 millennia. Long, interesting story why that is. One basic point is that because of the very intense tropical conditions, there was a lot of disease, and it wasn't fit for the most important vehicle of 2,000 years, the horse. So the horse made the great empires of the classical age. The horse made the Alexander's empire, the cavalry, the Roman Empire, all of the empires from China, the Mongols, and so forth, were based on what was the tank, the ability to move goods at fast speed, the communications network, which was
so Africa
basically,
didn't have horses.
And Africa didn't have horses south of just the northern strip of Africa, because they don't survive actually.
Because it's too hot? What is the problem?
It's the disease. It is hot. The climate is not good. They are not tropical animals. They're dryland, what's called steppe region animals. They like grasslands, but they don't like the heavy tropical climate.
You wouldn't expect that the horse will make civilization.
Oh, it's so important.
Okay.
It's really, you couldn't have an empire, you could not have global conquest. And by the way, it also played its role in the Americas, because the horse was actually an American species originally, even I'm talking 50 million years ago. And when the Asians arrived to the Americas 15,000 years ago on a land bridge that connected what's today Russia and today Alaska and North America, what's called Beringia, because the sea level was much lower, there were glaciers, and they took water away from the oceans, so people walked across from Asia to the Americas. There were horses everywhere in the Great Plains of the United States, and they hunted them to extinction around 10,000 years ago, which was a really bad move. It shows, if you hunt horses to extinction, you end up walking for 10,000 years instead of riding. And there were no pack animals except some llamas and alpacas in the high Andean region, but in, say, North America.
I didn't expect an evolution talk today.
No, but it's so deep and it's so real. So when the Europeans arrived in 1492 with Columbus, they had horses. They were conquistadores, but the local populations didn't have them. This was part of the incredible military advantage that the Europeans brought when they came, and they slaughtered and they dominated the indigenous populations. They also brought germs, by the way, which killed a lot of the native indigenous American population. Okay, Africa was poor by objective indicators and measures for 2,000 years of the historical period. And it was really ravaged by slavery starting in the 1600s by European and Arab slave traders. And as I said, it was colonized in the end of the 19th century by the European powers, who were, once they could protect themselves against malaria with this drug, which is an essence of a Peruvian bark called chincona, and you make quinine out of it, or quinine, we say in America. Put it in your as tonic water with your gin. That became, sipping your gin and tonic on the veranda is what enabled Britain to make its African empire starting around 1890. So Africa fell under a completely brutal European rule. The Europeans were not nice. Germany committed a genocide in West Africa in the first decade of the 20th century. That was Germany's first genocide. It was followed by the second genocide in World War II. The British were god-awful. The European powers in general were god-awful. The Belgians, of course, we know King Leopold was mad. And the Belgians chopped off the hands of thousands and thousands of Congolese who they accused of whatever petty crime and so forth. So it was a very, very brutal period. And Africa remained impoverished up through the middle of the 20th century. Literacy rates in 1950, 5%. All that empire, they didn't want to give schools, they didn't want to educate anybody. So Africa became independent in some countries with 4 or 5 people with a high school education out of millions. The Portuguese were maybe the worst at this because Portugal was pretty poorly educated at home and it did nothing in its colonies in Africa, in Mozambique or Angola and other places. But in general, the European imperialists were completely nasty and dreadful, and Africa was impoverished at the start. It was also a rather small population. Africa had about 9% of the world population in 1950, and health conditions were miserable, mortality rates of infants extraordinarily high. Then came independence, came the beginnings of literacy, came the beginnings of healthcare, came the beginnings of malaria control, and so forth. Child survival rose, and that meant that population started to grow. And Africa's population went from 9% of the world in 1950 to about 18% today. That's actually getting there because Africa, if you add up the 55 countries of the African Union, that's about 1.5 billion people, same size as India, same size as China. The big difference is that the imperial powers divided Africa into 55 little countries, not one of which can thrive on its own, whereas India and China, because of the history, remained unified countries afterwards.
Do you think this will change in the future? They will unite?
They have to. So I tell them every single time I have the opportunity that the African Union is the key. As 55, you can't make it. But as one African continental economy, you can make it. So what's happening now is Africa's population is continuing to rise. It's the only place in the world with rapid population growth.
And all the other are declining.
Everyone else has peaked or just about to peak or actually beginning a decline. Africa's population today is 1.5 billion. By 2050, it'll be 2.5 billion. That's a lot, adding 1 billion people in the next quarter century. If you go even farther and just try to extrapolate based on current trends, Africa's population reaches about 3.5 billion, and according to the UN most recent forecast, 3.7 billion by the end of the 21st century. And Africa goes from being 9% of the world population to being more than 30% of the world population. It's going to be a completely different world. What do I say to African leaders every time I have the chance? First, be Africa-wide. Second, get on quickly with mass education because that is the key to the economic development. Third, look at what China did. Follow that model.
How they grew.
How they grew 10% per year. And Africa, starting at this low base, could actually do that if it gets really well organized.
So if they play it well, they could be the dominant power in 200 years from now.
Yes, 200 years, no question. And if they play it well, what we don't even talk about now in the world economy, Africa, except that it produces coltan or it produces cobalt or it produces copper or diamonds. We're going to talk about Africa as a core part of the world economy without question. I would say, and I'm very optimistic about that, but the big change will be 50 years from now, because it's getting a whole generation through schooling, through turning Africa into an innovator, a technology power, but it can all happen. There's no barrier to that. So there will be Africa as an absolutely major part of the scene, but that's the drama right now. I tell them, look, China started in 1980, India roughly around 2000, 2025, take off. This is your time. Get moving. And understand that you have a real opportunity right now. Follow that model of very rapid growth.
Since we're on Africa, I went, when I was a YouTuber before, like 2 years ago, I went to Africa, to Burundi, which is the poorest country in the world in the terms that they use. And I went to, it was like around 30,000 euros that it cost us. And we put solar panels in an orphanage. And we put computers and internet. And these kids, when they have access to internet, they have everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So they can skip all the parts that took China so much time if they have access to the internet.
You got it. There's no barrier right now to just incredible leapfrogging. You don't have to go through 250 years of economics to get it right now. And what you said is completely right. You need connectivity and a solar panel, and you've got and a device, and that ain't expensive. And this is actually going to happen at a very large scale.
And now with Starlink as well, that you can put in rural areas and all this stuff. It's very interesting. So now in Africa, since we're on the topic, who do you think has more power out of the United States, China? Who has a bit more?
Definitely China.
China, Europe.
And the problem is, actually, China, there probably are a million to 2 million Chinese living in Africa right now, first of all. Americans are so racist, you don't find that.
Okay.
And this is really a deep part of America. America's basically a racist society, or we grew up as a racist society. So Africa, from Trump's point of view, he already labeled it. He said shithole countries. He's a racist. There's no doubt about it. It goes way back in his family, and it goes to him. Chinese, they're completely pragmatic. They're making business. They're making investments. They've got much better diplomacy than the United States. The U.S. is having a fit because, oh, China, you're doing all these terrible things to Africa. Neo-imperialism, bullshit. It's business. And I go to, like you went to rural areas, for example. I was in Ethiopia last year. Rural Ethiopia, very poor. But suddenly we were taken to farmer after farmer who's making money and building a second or third floor to their house and doing all sorts of things. What's going on here? The Chinese built a big dam on the Nile, actually, hydropower. So they have electricity for the first time. And they built a railroad, fast rail from Addis to Djibouti. And so these farmers, what are they doing? They're growing avocados now that they get on the train, they get to Dubai for breakfast in some resort hotel, and a value chain that was completely unimaginable 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and that's because of China.